To make this placemat, I am starting with this beautiful aqua and gray butterfly fabric, and I need to cut 2 strips the full length of the fabric that are 3 inches wide. So I'm going to end up with 2 strips that are 3 inches by about 40 inches long. To make my template, I needed a large circle, so I started with the plate, but I wanted it to show around the edges a little bit for my placemat. So I went ahead and measured 2.5 inches from my plate edge all the way around, and then I just put little dots, little marks at 2.5 inches all the way around so I could go back, and then to cut it, it was kind of like connect the dots. I just made sure to cut over all of those dots as I went around. I thought about using a coordinating fabric for the ruffle on the sides, but I chose to just go ahead and use the same fabric, and I really like how it turned out. So here are my 2 long pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and trim the ends with just some scissors, so that way the raw edges on the end are taken care of. And then we're going to put 2 of the ends together, right sides together, and sew them to connect them. Once that was done, I real quick opened them up and just pressed those seams flat. Just open that seam up so it was a little bit less bulk. Once those are connected, you're going to have a 3-inch by a very, very long strip. And so you're going to fold that entire strip in half and then put it on your sewing machine, and you are going to sew it in half. Now, you want to use the largest stitch setting that you have. So you want the stitches to be lengthwise as long as your machine can do them. That's 5.0 for me. I think that's pretty standard, but I just kept pressing my stitch length until it stopped, and that large stitch length is how we are going to gather our fabric. An important thing to remember is not to backstitch at either the beginning or the end of when you're sewing the long stitch along this long piece, because it won't gather properly and we won't be able to pull the strings if it is backstitched. So once we've gotten that all sewn together, we're going to go ahead and take one of our round pieces and we're going to fold it in quarters. I'm trying to get a mark at each of the 4 corners, so 4 equal parts. So to do this, I folded it and then folded it again, and then just pressed on those so a little flat, and it made just a little indent. And I'm going to go ahead and put a pin at each of those marks so that I know the quarters are exactly the same length. Now you're going to get that long piece that you sewed before, and you are going to fold it into 4 equal lengths. And you're going to put each of those equal lengths, you're going to pin onto your placemat, pinning them at those 4 corners. So the reason we do this is that when you gather it, you want to make sure that there's not a whole bunch of gathers on one side and the other side only has a few gathers. So by marking out the 4 spots on the placemat and then the 4 lengths of equal fabric, we're going to make sure that all around our placement has equal gathers. So it takes a little bit of extra time, but I find this is much easier to do before it's gathered than after it's gathered. Once you have that all figured out so that your ruffles are going to be even, take one of the sides of your ruffle and start pulling one of the pieces of thread, either the top or bottom. I've heard people say that pulling the bottom thread is easier, but I tried it both ways and I didn't really think either pulling the top thread or the bottom was easier or harder. Either really worked. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull that thread, and because it has large stitches, it's going to like crinkle the fabric and ruffle the fabric. And then you can actually move those ruffles down the piece of fabric. So you want to pull the thread out a little bit, get some ruffles, and then move those ruffles down until that quarter of the ruffle piece and that quarter of the fabric is the same width. So we're basically, because the round piece was going to be much smaller, we had lots of excess fabric on this long skinny piece that we're ruffling. We want to make sure to ruffle it and keep Keep pulling it down, keep pulling the string out until it lays flat on the piece. Now I chose to do this, you can do it quarter by quarter. I chose to do it half by half. So here I'm putting ruffles on half of my placemat. I marked it in the center and then went ahead and made sure that it got laid out just to the end piece. So hopefully that makes sense and you can kind of see. This took the longest part of the project, this ruffling part. Once you've done half of the ruffle on half of your placemat, go back and do the ruffle on the other side of your placemat. Now on the other end, it was funny. I told you not to backstitch. I actually backstitched. I think it's just muscle memory. I did it without even thinking about it, but I had to go ahead and pull some of the stitches out because it didn't work if it was backstitched. To join the two pieces together, I am just going to fold under one of my sides about 1/2 inch and then just put it over the other edge. And that way I'll just tuck the one side in there and I won't have any raw edges once my project is completed. One hint that I forgot to mention when it comes to gathering is not to cut your threads really close to the edge, but actually leave a long tail, leave 3 or 4 inches of thread at the end, and that way it's much easier to pull and help you do your ruffle. Once you have ruffled your long piece down, so it's the same size, you're going to sew around the ruffle, sew it onto one side of the placemat, and just do it 1/4 inch from the edge. You're going to need to go slow because the ruffle makes it have lots of bumps as you're sewing, but just make sure you go slow, sew around the whole edge. The ruffling process means there's a lot of threads. You can see them as I'm doing it, and don't worry about that. We are going to trim up those threads during this next step before we finish our project. It takes some time to sew around, so just go slow. I found it helpful to use a lot of pins as I sewed around, just taking the pins out as we go. You don't want to sew over the pins, so just make sure you're going with them and going slow around the entire placemat. Once we're done, it's going to look a little lopsided because it only has one side. It's going to be a little floppy, but that is okay. Go ahead and trim the threads that are around your placemat. Alright, now's the time to put that second round piece on our placemat. So you're going to have a round piece with the ruffles sewn on facing up, and then you're going to place the second round piece with the pretty side facing down. Go ahead and use a lot of pins at this step also. You want to go ahead and pin it all around so you're sure it lines up, and also so that it doesn't move around when you're sewing. Alright, when you've got it all pinned around, go ahead and sew it a little bit larger than 1/4 inch. Because we sewed that ruffle on at 1/4 inch seam allowance, if we sew it at 1/4 inch seam allowance again to get the second round piece on, you have a chance of that original thread showing through. So do it slightly larger than 1/4 inch and you'll be good to go. Also make sure to leave a 2 to 3 inch opening so that we can turn this placemat right side out. Once that is sewn around, we get to find that little place that we did not sew and flip this placemat inside out. I could have left probably a little bit bigger of an opening, but I am known for always sewing my openings so small so that it's hard to get my fabric out, but that's okay. That means there's less of an opening to sew closed. Go ahead and pull all these ruffles out, make sure it lays nice and flat, and then you're going to find that opening and pin it down. Pin it closed, making sure both sides, and we're going to sew right over that opening, catching the underside. This turned out really well. You can barely see it on the front. those stitches, and then you can see on the back that it caught that and closed that opening up really nicely. One of the last seams we're going to do is to sew 1/4 of an inch around the entire placemat, pulling the ruffles out and then sewing across. As you do this, be sure to look under several times to make sure that the bottom of the placemat is also pulled out and laying flat. Once you've sewn around it, you are done with your placemat. Put it on your table. You're going to need to probably make a couple more of them, but definitely enjoy. If you only wanted to make one, you could certainly use it as a centerpiece. The options are really endless. What did you think of this placemat? Do you use placemats in your house? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.